I'm going to show you what it looks like inside of a MMP ball bearing turbo for an N54. To give you an idea what's going on here, the upgrade that they did for these turbos is they took a factory turbo or a factory turbine housing and they replaced everything else. The center cartridge is I guess it's just machined from a solid chunk of aluminum. So it's a completely redesigned bearing housing. They use a GT35R bearing cage and completely custom turbine wheel. The compressor wheel looks like it's just a normal TDO4 19T or 20T or whatever size that is. Let's look inside of it and see what you guys think. This is the bearing housing, and it also has a plate that's bolted on it. I'll show you what you're looking at here so you can get an idea of if this was a good design or bad design or what actually happened and why this turbo failed. I'll give you some of my thoughts of what I think happened with it too. So this bearing housing, it's all aluminum. See, it's got two seals there. In the center there, that's where oil goes through. On the outer side, or the outside of the inside seal, that's where coolant goes through. It took me a while to kind of understand what I was looking at. I had to look at it for a little bit and understand what was going on there. So the coolant ports come in through the side, so it just goes in and out on the same side. And then the center, like I was saying, the ball bearing cage sits there. Oil goes through the cage and then runs out the bottom there. Here's a turbine shaft. There's no inducer on it, just an exducer. And so the machining for the turbine shaft is just the same as a GT35R or 28R or 3071R because the cage is all the same. The rear seal, I didn't even check what size that was. It's either TDO4 or it could also be the same as a GT35R. I need to go through and check that. Here's the plate. The plate just bolts directly to the bearing housing. The pin is right there that holds the bearing cage. I think the pin may be most of the problem. I think the issue is that the pins are coming out. But I don't know if this guy took this apart before sending it to me, so that's why I'm kind of confused about what the issue with this was to begin with. The one down here I have not taken apart has a lot of in and out play because the pin was not in there, so I was confused if it was already just laying out of it or if the guy removed it. Now, if you look closely at the pin, it has some unusual damage, and I'm not really sure how that happened. Oil is supposed to flow through there, but for some reason it looks like somebody smashed it with a punch. I guess maybe they were thinking they were trying to restrict the oil flow to it or something. I don't have a clue what was going on here. So part of what I think may have been an issue here is I think that the pin is just not sitting tightly or staying in place to hold the cage in. The pin goes right there in the center. And that's just my theory. I don't know. I haven't tried to put these back together yet. I think this bearing housing should be completely remade in cast iron because I kind of worry about it being aluminum. Now, the question I ask myself, is there any other turbo that I am aware of on the planet that has an aluminum bearing housing that has actually worked? I don't know of anything besides this one. Does anybody off the top of their head know what that is? This is from a Cummins 2900. That's the turbine shaft. These had a stationary bearing in them. So this is an all aluminum bearing housing. But that was a very old design, most likely more than 20 years old, and I think it has been discontinued. I have not seen anything else in the last 10 years of production that has had an aluminum bearing housing besides aftermarket stuff. This is kind of the concern I have with this being an aluminum part, is the rear seal area is worn out there. So I could probably machine that out and then put a sleeve in there. Yeah, I could definitely do that. I could put an aluminum sleeve in there. but I just wonder if that may have been part of the issue, because the center there being aluminum where the pin needs to press in. I think that I think it's just coming out of there because there's nothing to retain it in there. Like normally the GT35R, which is this cartridge here, they have an oil feed fitting that goes down and connects onto the top of the pin, so the pin cannot fall out, cannot move after the oil feed fitting is installed. But with these BMW bearing housings, they don't have an oil feed fitting like that. They're just a pipe that slides in with an O-ring, so there's no tension to hold that pin in. Here's what this piece looks like. I don't know if something went through it or what happened here, but I just know that this piece is not any good. It's bad because of where it's worn out here on the bearing race, but also the piston ring seal area is kind of worn out too. So it's going to need a new ball bearing cage. I think the shaft is still good, and a new compressor wheel, and then I can rebuild this one. Got a flange welded on there, and it's welded up on the back side, so they have more material to be able to machine out. You can see how much they cut out of this one. Based on me looking at this, it kind of looks like possibly somebody had bought these, and maybe they were leaking oil, and then they thought they needed to restrict it, so then they punched those two holes in the oil feed restrictor to try and restrict oil to it and damage it that way. Not really sure what was going on. The main issue with people in turbos is like there's not really a lot of good education on them, and I have a lot on the channel, so I tried to explain what's going on there. And a lot of times it's the oil drain that's the problem, or sometimes it could be the crankcase ventilation that's not good enough, and the oil is not draining well enough from the turbo, so it causes them to leak. So people try and fix that another way by restricting the turbo, because it's very common online that people claim that you need an oil restrictor, and then that's how they completely ruin the turbo. So stay tuned if you want to see more content on these turbos.